Hi everyone, this is my pre-recording for the Research Ethics Conference. So I'm just going to start sharing my presentation. Okay, so I'm very sorry that I can't be with you today. I will explain in this conference where I am and why I can't be with you. And yeah, so to introduce my paper, I'm talking about the role of common morality for principalism in biomedical ethics. And basically, this is based on a paper that I got published, a short paper got published in a medical journal last year. But I'm also going to talk about the other kind of ethics type projects that I'm involved in, or kind of the more interdisciplinary kind of nature of some of the work that I'm doing. Okay, so my name's Andy Jones, and I'm in the Theology and Religion department. I'm a postdoc there, and I'm on a project called God and the Book of Nature, which is funded by the John Templeton Foundation. Okay, so to tell you a little about my projects, I teach and research on Kant. So Kant is my specialism. That's what I did my PhD in. It was in the philosophy of, well, the influence of Kant, the philosopher, on the development of biology in Britain. And I also work with scientists and farmers. I also do some work with physicists at the moment. And I'm going to focus in this talk about my work, which I did with medical ethics as well. So just take you through some of the arguments in that paper, basically just talking about what is principalism, talk about this idea of there being some contemporary objections to the idea that there's a universal common morality underpinning medical ethics. And then I'm just going to offer some responses to those objections. So to start about talking about my projects briefly. So what I do basically is that I'm a specialist in Kant. I teach on Kant's philosophy of religion. I made a module and taught that from scratch this term. I'm writing a book just in the final stages. So got the reviews back, and they're okay. And yeah, basically, I'm just making those final corrections to a book based on my PhD, which looks at how Kant specifically influenced the development of biology in Britain, and what the implications of that are for contemporary issues in philosophy of biology. I also work with farmers and scientists, so I'm particularly interested in the use of chemicals in farming settings. So I was a member of the GW4 Crucible last year, which looked at antimicrobial resistance, and we thought, well, from our kind of collaborations there, we came up with this project where we wanted to focus specifically on identifying the densities of azoles. Azoles are a type of fungicide which are used by farmers on plants. So we're specifically interested in arable farming, and we're interested in the densities of those azoles in water bodies. And basically, those water bodies, well, if there are azoles in those water bodies, then that gives us reason to suspect that that there will be the opportunities for drug resistance in the fungi which those azoles are supposed to kill. And the reason for that is because they will be in lower densities in the water systems than they would be when they're immediately put on to the plants themselves. And this is particularly interesting because the fungi, one of the fungi that they kill is the Aspergillus spore, right? So and Aspergillus infections have consequences for human health as well. So at the moment in human health settings, we use azole treatments as a way of treating Aspergillus infections when they spore in the lungs. And if we get to a situation where those treatments are no longer effective because Aspergillus has become drug resistant, then we're going to have quite big problems for human health as well. Okay, I also work on working on the ethics of nuclear energies and innovation. So some of you may have gone to Robbie McKenzie's talk earlier today. It was on the session before this one, and I'm working with him, with students, master's students and PhD students in the University of Bristol to talk about kind of the ethical implications behind nuclear energies and how philosophers and scientists can collaborate with one another in important ways to give new perspectives on our understandings of nuclear energy at the moment. And yeah, and then another project which is kind of involved in this in the early stages is I'm really interested in knowledge exchange. So generally, I'm interested in how different people can collaborate with one another in order to kind of exchange knowledge effectively, and how you identify those kind of difficulties between different disciplines and resolve them as quickly as possible, right? So I've been speaking with people in the Innovation and Business Centre. I've been speaking with people in charities. I've been speaking with people at like the Francis Crick Institute, and we're just interested in getting as many kind of stakeholders involved in a discussion about how we exchange knowledge and what we should be thinking about when we are engaging in these kind of interdisciplinary collaborations. So that's kind of a kind of very whistle-stop tour of the kind of work that I do. So to focus about what I'm talking about today, which is specifically about this paper I wrote on principalism, yeah. So I was asked to write a short and accessible article defending principalism from like a philosopher's point of view against recent criticisms. So basically, I knew someone who was working in this field, and they felt that there wasn't enough defense from philosophers against what was against a certain trend which was happening in the literature in the biomedical sciences. And that was that kind of principalism was getting a pretty rough time because basically it just was becoming to be seen as an outdated principle. So first things first, what is principalism? It's basically the idea that medical practice should be based on principles that are universally applicable and acceptable by all. So it's like, a one-size-fits-all type rule, which is behind principalism. And the principles that were kind of originally adopted as ones which were endorsed by principalism was a respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. I'm not going to talk a lot about what that means, but it's important that these four rules are basically seen, or these four principles are basically seen as underpinning all moral practice. And that is, although it's being developed here in the context of medical practice, the claim was actually, that this is universal human morality. Yeah, so they said, because our principles are universally applicable, we defend a global bioethics and not merely customary, regional, or cultural rules. Our principles correlate with basic human rights and establish what is ethically acceptable for all societies. So, I mean, this was Beauchamp and Childress. This is them talking about principalism 40 years on, basically. So it's quite a foundational theory for the biomedical sciences. It came out kind of at the emergence of this idea that there was an ethical model behind the biomedical science, right? Or it came up soon after they started talking about ethics in the biomedical sciences. And yeah, they have this very strong idea that there is a universal kind of a universally applicable set of principles that we can apply to all societies, all humanities. And basically, some more recent publications have been asking whether these principles are really common to all. Yeah, it seems like it's quite a matter of dispute that the principles which underpin principalism are applicable to everybody. So I'm just going to go over kind of three ones which came up in this paper by Rhodes, which I focus on in my own article. And she argues that when common moral ideals become medical duties, this is one discordance between a universal common morality and medical ethics. So the argument basically is that in each of these cases, there's something which you're supposed to do in medical ethics, which you're not supposed to do in common morality, right? So, or the way that you would act for either one in either situation changes. So it just undermines this idea that there's a universal common morality. So for the first one, there's this idea that common moral ideals become medical duties. So an example of this is that, recommendations for treatment by medical professionals must be informed by the best scientific evidence rather than gut feelings. So in common everyday life, you can make your decisions based on gut feelings, but when you're a doctor, you've got to use evidence. Yeah. So there's this difference. And then sometimes commonly permissible behavior is medically impermissible. So in ordinary life, we can choose who we associate with, whereas medical practitioners must remain non-judgmental, or it may be permissible to share sensitive information in ordinary life, so to gossip, basically, whereas medical practitioners, confidentiality is assumed in all but exceptional circumstances. And finally, when it's commonly impermissible behavior, becomes a medical duty. So there's these situations in which medical professionals have to do things which would actually be impermissible. And the example that Rhodes gives is the need for medical professionals to probe into the details of patients' lives. And this would, she argues, would be normally morally impermissible. Yeah, so I think that, there's something important to be said about these criticisms. I think they do something, but they don't kind of completely reject a universal morality. So the examples expose that people do not base their everyday decisions on moral principles, which can be universal, sure. So sometimes people just aren't thinking morally, especially when they're like making this third point, especially when they're making decisions based on gut feelings, yeah. I mean, we can't really say that there's a difference between the morality of everyday ethical or everyday life and medical professionals, because on the one side, you're not acting morally at all, and on the other one, you are. I would say that if you're basing your decisions on gut feelings, you're probably not in a moral state of mind. So I think what it does show is that in everyday life, many actions are not formulated in accordance with the same level or any level of moral scrutiny, and that's the difference. It's not that there's different moral codes going on. It's just that there's a different a different standard of morality, almost like you're just not you're not engaging with morality as much. It's a different level of morality. So, I mean, to try and kind of probe on the context specificity of these universal common principles in morality, then I think many professions ask probing questions that would be inappropriate in other circumstances. So we can think of kind of mortgage brokers, counsellors, police officers, military personnel, kind of etc. So I would say that in terms of common morality, if we're going to revisit the claim, it's not so much that there are no common moral principles, but it's rather that if there are common moral principles, then the practices that will best instantiate these principles are going to be context specific, yeah. And we can kind of push this further than Rhodes does, I think. And this is an example which I'm not massively I'm not trying to endorse it. I'm just giving it as an idea, and that is, that if we're talking about justice, for instance, or autonomy, autonomy is probably an easier one. We could say that in the context of medical professionals and military professionals, their actions are going to differ significantly in terms of what they do to preserve autonomy. Yeah, so justice or autonomy might be used as a defense for killing during military service, but these actions would never be permissible within the standard medical practice, despite appealing to the same principles, right? So the idea is that if we were to accept that in a situation of war, soldiers may have a legitimate claim to say, I am protecting the autonomy of my citizens of my country by killing certain individuals in certain contexts. Obviously, you would have to see the situation and understand how that kind of fleshed out. But we may say, actually, in principle, it might be justifiable for killing to be for killing to be a way of maintaining and defending autonomy. Whereas I think we would say that this is much harder or even impossible to establish in a medical sense. Yeah. So killing is always wrong for medical practitioners. At least I think that argument is simpler in the medical sense. So where does this leave universal common morality? So the protection of principles such as autonomy and justice might be context specific and not universally applicable to actions across all situations. And this does not necessarily entail that there are not universal principles motivating moral actions. And I gave you the example of intentional killing. It might be permissible for the sake of maintaining autonomy in warfare, but never in medical practice. And this does not mean that either action is not compatible with the universal principle of maintaining autonomy. It's just that the way in which you maintain autonomy in those different circumstances differs significantly. So therefore, I think kind of the middle ground between principalism and the criticisms against principalism is that the instantiation of universal moral principles, which motivate moral actions, they can be understood as context specific. Yeah. So we can have the idea that we're following the same general rules, but the way in which we follow those rules becomes very context specific and dependent on our situation. Okay, so thank you for listening. Oh, that's not the slide I want, but this is the slide I want. So thank you for listening. And if anything has kind of interested you about this talk today and about the kind of stuff that I'm doing, do get in contact with me. So I'm on Twitter, Andy Jones, PhD. There's a link to the paper that I've been talking about today. and I'm on LinkedIn, and I have a personal website there. So I'm going to upload this PowerPoint to somewhere, so you can click on those links. Also, yeah, I didn't tell you the reason I'm not here. So I'm not here because I'm at a farming festival. I'm at a festival called Wellspring, and I'm literally probably just coming back from London at the moment. So yeah, so my work with the farmers has ended up kind of leading to these situations where we're going. We've been interviewing farmers and talking to them about how they understand their relationship to chemicals, and what the drivers and well, what enables them, and what barriers are there for them using chemicals on their soils. And we've got involved in kind of broader discussions with scientists about soil health, soil science, soil regeneration, and that's what this farming festival, which I'm at today, at the moment, is all about. So yeah, so please get in contact, and thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please just send them to me. You can either send them to me on Twitter or get in contact on LinkedIn. My website, my website has a way of contacting me as well, or just send me an email at it's not on here, but aj359@exeter.ac.uk. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a great conference.